接下来我们要邀请，刚刚还有人记得我们说这个今年的主题是什么的吗？有人记得吗？有人记得吗？没有人记得。哦，好，没关系。我们待会呢要请 Charles McCathie 来给我们讲一下 HTML5。好，我们今年的主轴。Charles 呢是一个非常神奇的人物，他目前在 Opera 工作，曾经在 W3C 基金会有长达6年的时间的经验，以及10几年的网络的无障碍环境部分的工作。那今天我们非常荣幸的邀请他从西班牙远道而来，到这边来给我们讲一下这个最新的技术。我们用掌声欢迎他，谢谢。
谢谢。你好。谢谢。我爱 COSCUP。That's pretty much it. For those of you who don't want to listen to English, now is a good time to get a book. Start checking out that IRC channel. Thank you very much for having me. It's a big honor to be here. This is the first time I've been to Taiwan, and I'm never quite sure what to expect. But after a day, mostly what I'm expecting is a lot of fun and a lot of interesting stuff. So you've only got an hour and the fun starts. I'm going to talk about HTML5 and about some stuff that isn't HTML5. I'm going to talk about other web technology that's being developed, because there's a lot of it. I'm going to talk a little bit about how these things get made. Where do these standards come from? How does W3C work? How many people in here have been involved in a W3C working group? Anyone? A couple? How many people have been involved in an open source project? Bunch more. They're not that dissimilar, which is both good and bad. And then I'm going to talk about a few specific examples, and I'm going to talk about accessibility, because I've spent getting close to 3/4 of my life working on accessibility stuff, mostly as a hobby or as a second job or something else to do. And it's important, and I think it's interesting. So I'm going to begin with HTML5. Who here is a web developer? Who here does web stuff or makes web pages? Hands up so I can see. Quite a few. How many people have read the HTML5 specification? All of it. All of it. Good, so you're all sane and intelligent. How many people have read some of it? A few. How many people read HTML4? Like the whole... Yeah, I used to be less clever. I read the whole thing. What's new in HTML5? For people who aren't sure, there's one thing that I think is the coolest thing of all in HTML5, and it's not really a feature. Right? It's not Canvas, it's not forms. It's the fact that HTML5 explains how you make a web browser deal with pages you get on the web. Because HTML4 and 3 and 2 and 1 all said HTML is putting this tag at the start, and then one of these tags, and then one of these tags. And people went to make browsers And they said, so we expect one of these tags and one of these tags and one of these tags. And if you make a browser that implements HTML4, then it's going to be almost useless. Right? Anyone know how many browsers completely and accurately implement HTML4 entirely? Anyone want to guess? Zero. There are no HTML4 implementations. Now that's not so bad, because a browser that expected HTML4 wouldn't be able to render Google.com. It's not HTML. It's some tags that look like HTML, but I can get magnetic Chinese characters, put them on the fridge, make a big line, and say, look, I wrote Chinese. It's not Chinese if it doesn't mean something in Chinese. It's not just Google.com. It's a huge amount of the web. Most of the web is not HTML. It's stuff that looks similar. It's got tags, but it's got errors and mistakes. Until now, every browser had to try and understand what the person who wrote the code was trying to do. And there are lots and lots of common ways of doing that. But no browser renders every page on the web. Right? It just doesn't happen that all pages will work in your browser. Because instead of implementing HTML4, we started with HTML, then we tried to copy some bugs in IE. Because important websites copied their code, made it work in IE, even though it wasn't HTML. So we tried to make those pages work in the browser. Then Firefox copied one of us and tried to understand what we did to make the pages work. And then people made their pages work in Firefox, so everything broke again. It was horrible. It's still horrible. Now, the best browsers, maybe 95, 97% of pages will work, at most. HTML5 does something new. It says, whatever you get, whatever the tool produced, Dreamweaver, CMS, somebody scribbling code by hand, here's how you make it into a web page. What that means is all the browsers can do the same thing, not just with the 1% of pages that are HTML, but with the 99% of pages that actually are not HTML, they just look very like it, and the author thinks it was HTML. That's a really cool thing. That means we can make browsers that do the same thing. And that means developers can write pages and expect them to work. And users can therefore expect them to work too. So that's the most exciting thing to me in HTML5. I can't think of anything more boring. You can't do a demo for that. It's like, look, the page turns on. But that's something that's there. There are a number of other features, and I'm going to look into some of them and talk about some of them. HTML5 has a whole lot of multimedia. Try this mic. This mic works better? Yes? Wave from the back if this mic works better. Okay. So, yeah, I get feedback too. There's lots of multimedia in HTML now that wasn't there. 10 years ago, there was not very much video on the web. There was some. There was not a lot of interactive graphics. There was the occasional animated GIF. Forms were very basic. drag and drop was something you did in Java applets or applications, and so on. I'm going to show a dumb, stupid demo. This is all HTML5. It's simple, magic, and it's basic. I have another one. This is HTML5 too. It has a cute video. It's just using some canvas, some new forms, elements to make things happen. HTML5, when I talk about it, is a W3C specification. Right? There is a document that people are writing, a lot of people, at W3C, and they're arguing about what goes in and what doesn't. And whatever ends up in that document is what I mean when I say HTML5. If you read the blogs and read the papers, listen to what people say, they'll show you HTML5 demos that are all CSS or JavaScript or some other stuff. There's a lot of things that are important now that are not in HTML5. They're just things we're doing at the same time. Really, it doesn't matter whether you call this stuff HTML5 or not. If you want to talk to other people, you need to communicate, and whether you use the name perfectly correctly is not important. But there's all this cool stuff that's being done. CSS transitions. Woo. Thank you. I did that myself. As you'll see further on, I'm a terrible programmer and an even worse designer. But even I can use CSS transitions. I had a geo demo, but it doesn't seem to be there. Further on. Web fonts, rounded corners. These rounded corners here, how important do you reckon they are? How important is it to have rounded corners on a web page? Very important. How many millions of dollars have been spent by designers to get rounded corners? How many $1 million in bandwidth has been used to ship down extra images? How many $1 million has been spent in hardware that can show rounded corners faster, in upgrading phone networks to show rounded corners? The answer is actually, it's really, really important. You know, if you had that kind of money, you could do something like cure cancer, or buy nice wine and fancy cars for all of us. But no, they spent it on rounded corners. Now you can do it in CSS. It takes 3 seconds, and there's lots more money available, lots more resources to do something useful. So we could all get a Mercedes, right? Or we could get a new request saying, we want rounded corners that actually change the way that they're rounded as you... No, forget it. One of the things that's not in HTML5 is some of the accessibility stuff that was in HTML4. HTML4 was a great big improvement for people with disabilities. You could do things that you couldn't do nicely before to make the web work better for everybody. Some of those things have been taken out of HTML5, and towards the end I'll talk a little bit about that, about what I think about that, and whether it's good or bad. The short answer is innovation is everywhere. It's not just in HTML5. So Opera's role in HTML5, this is the advertising slide I have to put in. 2005, W3, 2004 even. 2005, W3C had a workshop. They wanted to say, what is the future of HTML on the web? And Opera went along and said, well, you know, there's this XHTML stuff. Who writes XHTML? A couple. I do, every so often. This slide is just plain HTML, but my last one was XHTML. Who has written XHTML? More. Who has been very disappointed to find that... right. When you write it, it doesn't work. It still doesn't work. That's a pity. Technically, it's an improvement. But it's useless. So, 5 years ago, we started with Mozilla and Apple. The What Working Group, it's a political pressure group. Right? Anyone who tells you What Working Group is politics-free, What Working Group was founded deliberately for political purposes. You don't get much less politics-free than that. How do we know? Because we founded it. And its goal was to develop HTML. Opera did a web forms proposal. We implemented web forms. I don't know if you've seen the new stuff you can do. All of these nice features, you know, number buttons, a date picker, where I can actually select a date, a slider. All of these are new form features. If you look at the source code for this, you can't yet because I haven't put it online. But if you look at the source code, it's just input type equals date, input type equals range. These are trivial things. And the reason why Opera's implementation is so ugly, we did it in 2005. We haven't changed it for 5 years. It was a demo to show how it happened. We're actually cleaning it up because you should be able to style these things. Right? We know that you need to make them nice. 2007, we said, oh, you should have a video element in HTML. That's now been done. Opera is a big W3C member, not in size of company. You know, Opera has about 800 people. IBM probably has more than 800 employees in Taipei. Microsoft probably has more than 800 employees in Taipei. But at W3C, those three companies have about equal levels of people involved. Right? Those three companies are paying about the same amount of money to make W3C work, providing the same resources. Working group chairs, spec editors, people in working groups. Because we're actually fairly heavily committed to standards. So one of the things we did with HTML5 is push very hard to say, you know, we set up this political group to make HTML, but we really, really want it to be at W3C. We want it to be a proper standard and not something that we make with a few of our friends. And that's an important principle for us, because W3C involves a whole lot more people. It's very easy to get into the What Working Group. You don't have to make any patent agreements. You don't have to sign anything. You join a mailing list, and away you go. On the other hand, W3C actually brings a lot of people that don't participate in what we do. It has better international reach. It has better recognition by governments. It has better recognition by industries like TV and the mobile industry, who are actually putting the web on billions and billions of devices. So it's important to make standards that everybody will recognize. It doesn't matter so much where you make the technical work. It matters where the end result is published. That's politics, and it's unfortunate, but it's the way it is. So W3C has a fairly straightforward way of working. Someone makes a proposal. We said, let's have HTML5. W3C said, nah, that's a stupid idea. Let's have XHTML2. 3 years went by. They said, XHTML2 isn't so good. Let's have HTML5. Yay! So they put together a working group. Basically, they make an agreement that says, come and talk to us about, or come and talk about what HTML5 should be. You have to agree not to be too rude to people. And you have to agree that if you have patents that cover this stuff, you won't charge people licenses. That's about it. It's not very complicated. In most W3C activity, they ask you to be a member. W3C has bills to pay, and they ask companies to help pay them. So Opera hands over money every year. But if you're an individual and you don't work for Google or IBM or the Hong Kong Jockey Club or various other member organizations, then you can just join. And then you talk, right? Like an open source project, you write email, you argue about why your idea is so much better and everybody else's idea is stupid. And eventually, you either argue so much that everybody walks away and they copy your idea, or they convince you that your idea is really crazy and you forget about it. We get a draft, we get another draft, we get another draft. We ask the public to comment on this. W3C documents go through a stage called last call, which is, like in the bar, last call for anybody to come up to the bar. Every comment that comes in at last call from every person in the world must be tracked, must be recorded, and the group has to explain how they answered it. Until they do that, they can't finish the spec. This is one reason why W3C specifications take a long time, right? If the whole world is watching and the whole world is commenting and you've got to answer them all, then that's a lot of work. So the people who are doing that work, being people, sometimes sleep, they have to go through all of that process before it's done. When you finally agree, you publish something, you send it to W3C for recommendation. They say, yep, this is good. How do we know it's good? Well, we asked the whole world what it was like, and in the end, the whole world said, yeah, that's all right. Works for me. And W3C has a document you can go and read that tells you exactly how this process works, but that summary is pretty good. So, new things in the web. How many people have used SVG? 1, 2, 3, a few. SVG is pretty new. It's in IE9, or it will be. It's been around for 10 years, a bit more than 10 years, right? And if you don't know it, it's like HTML, except for doing graphics, which, because it's HTML, it means that you can make images from code. If you want to write code that generates ping images or bitmap images, then, frankly, you need to be much cleverer than me, because I'm not very clever and I'm not a very good programmer. But if you want to generate SVG, you just need to produce text. Hello world, produce a bit of text. That's not a hard programming exercise. Making SVG, that's not very much harder because it's all text. It looks like HTML. SVG, so it has interactive animations. It has video. I have a demo here, which I actually wrote all by myself. It uses video, it uses interactive animation, it's declarative, and it's this much code. There'll be an exam on this at the end of the weekend. You'll all pass without even reading. It's really simple to generate this stuff. And see, no cats were actually harmed. my animated clock. This clock took me ages because I had to figure out the mathematics of the little dots around the circle. It probably took me like an hour to produce. But it's interactive, see? It changes color when I click. Click. And, being a proper wind-up clock, I can wind it up. Thank you very much. I've got text. I can do interesting things with the text. Oops. Again, this is very complex code. There's that much of it. And all of this bit in the middle, which just defines a line, I just made up numbers at random. Right? I didn't even think about those. They're just random numbers I added. So the only bit I thought about was half the content of this page. To do stuff like this. I've got animation, I've got video, I've got audio, I've got interaction. So I can do things like make user interfaces. This is where I prove my skills as a designer. I sat down, we were talking about how would you design an interface for widgets where you turn them on and off, where you decide what you want. So I said, well, I'm going to make a button and create new widgets. I can move my widgets around, I can drag and drop them, I can destroy them. When I put them here, they're no longer in the DOM. I can rebuild the list. I can hide all of this. I'm clearly not going to get a job as a user interface designer. I can live with that. But once again, I have a huge amount of code for this. There is this page and this page and a few lines more. And it took me, I don't know, something like 2 hours to write it, because I'm a hopeless JavaScript programmer. Every time I write a line of JavaScript, it doesn't work, and I have to go back and look it up in the book. So it takes me like 5 minutes per function or per method. But doing things like changing these from stupid circles to actual icons with images, I can do that in about 10 minutes. Attaching these icons so they run real code, and I can attach them to real functions, even I can do that, and it takes another 10 minutes. It's a very simple prototyping exercise that leads to real interfaces. And it turns out that because this is 10 years old, it was mostly used originally in mobile phones. Probably a quarter of the people in this room have a mobile phone whose user interface is written in SVG. Right? Those nice icons and that background that sit there, it's SVG because it's very easy to prototype. It's very portable. All you need is a browser. And now, that even web browsers run this stuff, it goes on any kind of device you want. So, 10 years worth of work after SVG was finished, and it's almost universally available. There's other stuff that's coming to the web really, really fast. A lot of the cool applications, on your iPhone or your Android phone, a lot of cool software makes use of the fact that it has access to the device, right? You have geolocation, you have a GPS, you have an address book in your phone, you can send SMSs. If you write code for the web, it can't do any of those things. It can present some stuff on the screen. You can click on it. Maybe you can use the keyboard to navigate it. And then it all goes back to the server, and the server does some processing and sends you information back. You don't know anything about the user. That's been the case for 20 years, and there's one very good reason why. This information is amazingly sensitive. When I put my credit card number into a website and somebody intercepts it, they can go and steal, well, actually my credit card's probably overdrawn, so they can't take anything. But if I had a credit card that worked, they could take, hundreds of dollars away from me. If I put my physical location up where people can get it on the web, they know where I am. All right. Someone already did it. The organizers of COSCUP, who are nice people, by the way, and do great things, told the whole world that today I will be sitting in this hall, standing in this hall. That means I'm not at home. Right? If I had a fancy car, that would mean I would not be watching my fancy car. If I had 3 small kids, that means I would not be watching my 3 small kids. It's not such a problem. But when you have a device that follows you around, when any web application can find out where you are, and where your kids are, and where your friends are, and whether you're at home or on your own somewhere you shouldn't be, whether you are the kind of person who spends a lot of time in very expensive shops, or whether you're the kind of person who never goes anywhere that you can shop and never goes near a bank and probably doesn't have $1 in their pocket, that kind of information becomes important security information. So, privacy matters. Right? Security matters. It doesn't matter to users until 5 minutes after they discover they had a problem. Nobody cares about privacy and nobody cares about security until it's too late. And when it's too late, they come and blame browsers, because we're the ones that let them get into trouble. So that's why we've been reluctant to open this stuff up. It's why we want to make sure the security stuff matters. We can do things like this. They want to know where I am. Let's see. This particular application is sending information to Google. Google is sending information back. And let's see if they can find me. I don't know. Can anyone recognize where I am from this? That's not here? That's far away. Sorry? It's good security, right. It works by figuring out what Wi-Fi points are around. So, for example, if the Wi-Fi points around here normally live somewhere else, then that might explain why it's somewhere else. I did it this morning. So, this morning, Google claimed I was here on this spot. That's not quite true. My room in the hotel is more like here. When we do this in Oslo, quite often we get an accuracy of 2 or 3 meters. Right? So that's quite cool if you want to build apps. As I said, privacy matters, security matters. But if you want to build cool applications, having this kind of resolution location in a normal browser, that's really, really cool. So long as the user is in control of when they tell you, you can do things that are actually exciting. Not just, where am I, find my way around. Does anyone know of Jill and/or Bondi? Jill is an initiative by Vodafone, China Telecom, and a couple of others to make more of these APIs. Bondi is a different one. They came up, two groups working independently, came up with two sets of specifications for how you would do this. Simple JavaScript APIs like geolocation, but for SMS, for billing using your phone, for access to your camera. Very cool stuff. Two small closed groups working in private. They produced rubbish. When we sat down to implement what they'd worked on very, very fast and very, very secretly, it was garbage. They hadn't asked enough people. They hadn't put it in front of people who are testing and implementing. And when we tried to implement these specs, honestly, what happened is we would get the spec and the engineers would say, it's impossible to understand what they want to do and what they mean. And we'd write back and we'd say, what do you mean by this? And they'd say, oh, it's top secret, we can't tell you. And we'd say, but you're paying us to make it work. Yeah, that's true. And they'd go away again, and they'd come back and they'd say, yeah, actually we're not sure. What do you think it should mean? So it took quite a long time after these things were finished to make them more or less usable. They've learned, or the people who did this have learned from their mistakes. They're now working in a much bigger group to do the same thing again, to have one set of standards, which they are also working on at W3C. So they're open, and people can go and look at it and say, wait a minute, you've done a good job on the things you were thinking of, but you've missed something. Please fix this up. That's what open standards give you. And when you have SMS access, when you have access to your contacts, you can do things like write the application I wrote 2 or 3 weeks ago, which uses geolocation and SMS and your contacts database. It's 2 pages of JavaScript. It just looks like some buttons, so there's not much to show. But if you pick someone out of your contacts database, you send them an SMS, you just click to run this application for them, and it sends them a message saying where you are and asks the application running on their phone to tell you where they are. And it's help me find you, and you need to actually say, yes, I'm prepared to tell this person where I am, but it's trivial to write. You've seen my code, and I made it work. And once it works, because it's the web, it works everywhere. I can put a runtime onto a 5-year-old Nokia phone and use this application. I can put it onto a Macintosh, plug in a GSM card so that it can actually send an SMS, and it'll work. I can buy the shiniest, newest, most exciting Android device, put a runtime on it, and the same application works exactly the same. This is cool for developers. Right? This is what's good about the web. It doesn't only work on the greatest, newest devices, it works on old devices. And at Opera Mini, we're working on making stuff like this work on 10-year-old phones. Because if you walk around, most African capital cities, almost every single person owns a mobile phone. You can buy a mobile phone on every second street corner because there's a guy with a table selling second-hand or third-hand phones. The mobile phone is the most popular piece of electronics ever. Right? More people have phones than radios. More people have phones than computers, by a million zillion miles. So giving people access to information and technology, making it work on phones, that changes the world. That's actually very cool stuff that you can do. And giving developers access to everybody who has a phone, that's the most enormously huge market there is. Everybody who has any money at all has a phone. And quite a lot of people who have almost no money have a phone. And the reason is, if they get a phone, it's easier to make money. Right? Mobile phones are one of the things that makes poor people richer. So getting all this stuff to work there is fairly cool. I'm going to wind up talking a little bit about accessibility. HTML4, you could do a few things. You had access keys, so you could make keyboard shortcuts. You could put Alt on an image. Who has put an image into a web page or into a blogging service like Flickr or Picasa? Who's posted an image on the web? Everybody who's awake. Who has made sure that image has an alternative text on it, a label so people can read it? At least once. Who has put an image and not done that? That's me, right? It's bad. Don't ever do that. I can tell you it's bad. I've done it. I know it's bad. But we don't do everything perfect all the time. They set up this whole conference and there's no glass of wine here. There are two things in HTML4, long desk and summary, that are not in HTML5. And there are arguments why not and arguments why. The fundamental argument for removing some things from HTML is they are dark data. They're invisible. When you copy and paste your web page and write a new version, you don't see the long desk attribute. You don't see the summary attribute, so you just leave the same old data in it. And it's broken. It's confusing and misleading and wrong. And so the argument goes, you should take it out. You should remove those things because they cause problems. The question I have is, all right, so in some cases it's broken, but in some cases it's not broken. If it's not always broken, should you throw away all of the good stuff with all of the bad stuff? Right now, the discussion in the HTML working group says, for long desk and summary, yes. Throw it all away. You just don't have any ability to do that. I disagree with that. I will be arguing again that they should actually change. I don't know what will happen. It's not the most important thing in the world. It's not the most important thing in accessibility. I happen to think that we would do better one way than the other. But the whole world is welcome to this discussion, and the whole world will decide whether I'm crazy or whether I'm right. Another area that's really tricky. When you write a web application, you assume people use a mouse, right? That's how everyone uses the web. They click on things. We had some compatibility problems with Gmail when it was first produced. Because Opera is has a record as a very keyboard-friendly browser. We had lots of keyboard users. And they'd try to navigate around Gmail and they couldn't. And we scratched our heads and looked at it, and you can click on anything you want, it works. It turned out that for a while, what they were doing at Google was drawing some text in blue and some text in black, and then listening for a click anywhere on the page, and calculating what text you'd clicked on. So if you didn't click on the text, if you tried to move around the keyboard, it just didn't work. The web has more devices on it than ever. You know, when I was a young, going to be a web designer, the big argument was, do you have to design for screens that are 640 by 480 pixels, as well as the new, exciting 800 by 600 pixel high-resolution screen? Should you support both of these devices? That was it. That was device independence. Cross-platform design was Netscape and Windows. Sorry, Netscape and Explorer. Today, how many people have a phone that can't access the web? Does anyone have a phone that you cannot use a web browser on? Now, I'm assuming that, well, who's got an iPhone? iPhones. All the people with Apples? Not quite. Who's got an Android phone? Lots of Androids here. Who's got a UIQ phone? There's one in every bunch. We've got more devices than we've ever had before. And some of our devices have touch input. And some of our devices have motion sensing. And some of our devices have keyboards. Who's got a phone with a keyboard? Like, whose phone has a proper keyboard? A bunch of people. Whose phone is a touch screen? So, working out how you get input from the user can be complicated, right? The way we do it right now is we add more and more and more and more events to listen for. We check for clicks and touches and double touches and accelerometer events and keyboard events, and then we discover that people have different keyboards, so we try and figure out what keyboard they have and write 50 different code paths for 50 different keyboards. This has been a failure. It doesn't work that way. So we need to do something new. We're going to get more devices. We have Nintendo Wiis. We have things you can talk to. HTML5 has an element called command. It's actually a really cool idea. It basically says you can have something, it can have an access key, it can have a shortcut behavior, and the device will work out how the user is going to activate that. So you create the command element, you use that as a trigger for some function in your game or in your interface or in whatever it is you're developing, and you leave the click, touch, lick, shake, talk to question to the device, instead of actually having to write 70 pages of JavaScript trying to guess what input methods the user might have on their device and getting it wrong. And there's another reason why getting rid of all of that script and all of that complication is good. Has anyone ever run out of batteries on their telephone? And it happens from time to time. And it turns out that when you have no batteries, it's not really a phone, it's just a very expensive lump in your pocket. The more JavaScript processing you do, the faster you run out of batteries. The more errors we have to correct in the browser, the faster we burn the battery. The more processing, the faster we burn the battery. So making these things simpler for developers makes them simpler for browsers, which makes them work better for users in the most simple way: their phone keeps running instead of turning off. I'm actually going to skip Canvas accessibility because we don't have very much time. Canvas, I'll show you a Canvas. This is Canvas. This is a piece of HTML and JavaScript that was written over a weekend by a 16-year-old kid who we hired at Opera afterwards. It's used for games. Its benefit is it's very, very fast. Right? JavaScript, modern JavaScript, is extremely fast. You can write applications in JavaScript and HTML instead of making them native because the speed now means you don't care if they're native apps. Canvas gives you very fast graphics to go with those, but it's complicated for doing things like accessibility. And I'm going to stop there and leave all of 4 minutes, I think, for questions. So there are no foolish questions. This is my email address in case you're too shy to ask one now. I may or may not know the answer anyway. But with that, thank you very much. 谢谢。
谢谢各位也谢谢 Charles 带来那么精彩的演讲。在各位出去抢食物之前呢，有一件事情跟各位报告。如果请检查一下你手上的那个 badge， 如果你的便当券没有在里面的话。